The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of Miller's General Store, kicking up a cloud of dust that settled on Margaret Hayes's already worn traveling dress. She clutched her carpetbag tighter, her knuckles white against the faded fabric. 28 years old, plain-faced with mouse-brown hair pulled into a severe bun, Margaret knew what awaited her in this frontier town of Redemption Creek, Montana Territory: rejection, same as always. This was her 5th attempt as a mail-order bride. 5 different men, 5 different towns, and 5 times she'd been sent back like defective merchandise. The first man, a farmer in Kansas, had taken one look at her and declared she was too thin for bearing children and farm work. The second, a shopkeeper in Nebraska, had wanted a pretty face to attract customers, and sent her packing within an hour. The third had already married someone else by the time she arrived. The fourth had been drunk at their meeting and confessed he couldn't afford a wife after all. And now, William Thornton of Redemption Creek, Montana, a cattle rancher who'd promised in his letters that he valued character over beauty and sought a sensible woman for a practical partnership. Margaret descended from the coach, her legs stiff from 3 days of travel. The driver handed down her trunk with barely concealed pity in his eyes. Everyone always pitied her. She was used to it. "Miss Hayes." A reedy voice called out. Margaret turned to see a thin man in his 50s, bald except for a ring of gray hair, approaching with obvious reluctance. William Thornton. Her heart sank. He looked nothing like the robust rancher he'd described in his letters. "Mr. Thornton," she replied, forcing a smile. He stopped 3 feet away, his eyes traveling from her worn boots to her simple bonnet, his expression souring with each passing second. That is, you're not what I expected," he stammered. "I sent you a photograph," Margaret said quietly. She had sent an honest likeness, unlike some who sent pictures from their youth or of prettier cousins. "Yes, well, photographs can be deceiving. You look older. And plainer. I was hoping for someone with more vitality." He cleared his throat. "I'm afraid I've made a terrible mistake. My foreman convinced me I needed a wife, but seeing you now, I realize I'm quite content as a bachelor." The familiar sting of rejection burned through Margaret's chest, but she'd learned long ago not to let it show. She straightened her spine. "I see. Well then, Mr. Thornton, I won't impose upon your hospitality. When is the next stage out of town?" The store owner, who'd been listening shamelessly from his doorway, called out, "Not till Thursday, miss." 3 days from now. "Thursday," Margaret repeated, fighting the despair rising in her throat. 3 days in a town where everyone would know she'd been rejected yet again. 3 days of whispers and pitying looks. Thornton shifted uncomfortably. "I suppose I could pay for your lodging at the boarding house until then. It's the least I can do." "That won't be necessary," Margaret said, her pride flaring. "I have my own funds." That was a lie. She had exactly $4.30 to her name. But she'd rather sleep in the street than accept charity from a man who'd looked at her like she was spoiled meat. Thornton actually looked relieved. He tipped his hat awkwardly. "Well then. Good luck to you, Miss Hayes." He turned and practically fled to his wagon. Margaret stood alone on the dusty street as curious townspeople peered from windows and doorways. Her 5th rejection. The pattern was becoming unbearably familiar: hope, travel, rejection, shame, return. Except this time, she had nowhere to return to. The boarding house in St. Louis where she'd been working as a seamstress had let her go, replacing her with a younger girl who could see fine stitches better than Margaret's aging eyes allowed. "Miss?" The store owner approached, genuine kindness in his weathered face. "Name's Joe Miller. I own the store here. Look, I heard what happened, and I'm sorry. That Thornton's a fool. But about lodging, my wife and I have a small room above the store. You could stay there for $1 a night, meals included. It's not fancy, but it's clean. $1 a night would leave her with almost nothing. But what choice did she have? Could I, perhaps work for my keep? Margaret asked, hating how desperate she sounded. I'm an excellent seamstress, and I can cook and clean. Miller's face softened. Tell you what. My wife's been poorly lately, could use help with the housework and minding the store. You help out, and we'll call it even for room and board until Thursday. After that, we can see about more permanent arrangements if you'd like to stay in town. It wasn't much, but it was something. Margaret felt tears prick her eyes, the first kindness she'd encountered in months. Thank you, Mr. Miller. You're very generous. Ah, don't mention it. Come on inside. Martha will want to meet you. As Margaret followed him into the store, she made a silent vow. This was the last time. No more mail-order bride advertisements. No more hoping some man would see past her plain face to the capable, loyal woman beneath. She would make her own way, even if it meant spending the rest of her life alone. She didn't know that fate had other plans, plans that would begin tomorrow on a lonely stretch of road outside town.
The next morning, Margaret woke before dawn, determined to earn her keep. She helped Martha Miller prepare breakfast, cleaned the living quarters, and was restocking shelves in the store by the time the first customers arrived. Martha, a plump woman in her 60s with kind eyes and painful arthritis in her hands, watched Margaret work with appreciation. Lord, child, you're a blessing. Haven't seen these shelves so organized in months. By afternoon, Margaret had proven herself invaluable. She'd mended a customer's torn shirt while they waited, reorganized the entire fabric section, and even suggested a new way to display the more expensive items to catch customers' eyes. Margaret, Joe said around 3 o'clock, I need to deliver some supplies to the Reverend's wife. She's been sick and can't make it to town. Would you mind watching the store for an hour? Of course, Margaret replied, pleased to be trusted. After the Millers left, Margaret enjoyed the quiet. She was dusting the counter when she heard it, the sound of hoofbeats, fast and irregular, then a heavy thud outside. She rushed to the door and gasped. A horse stood trembling in the street, its saddle empty and stirrup broken. But worse, a man lay crumpled in the dirt about 20 yards down the road, not moving. Margaret ran to him, her heart pounding. He was face down, a large dark stain spreading across the back of his shirt. Blood. He'd been shot. Sir? Sir, can you hear me? She gently turned him over, struggling with his weight. The man was perhaps 35, with strong features darkened by sun and dust, dark hair matted with sweat. His eyes fluttered open briefly, startling blue against his tanned face. Ambush, he whispered. 3 miles, North Road. Then he passed out. Margaret looked around frantically. The street was empty, most folks were at their midday meal. She couldn't move him alone, and she couldn't leave him bleeding in the street. She made a decision. Using strength she didn't know she possessed, Margaret dragged the man toward the store. It took her 10 minutes to get him up the porch steps and through the door. She laid him on the floor behind the counter where he'd be out of sight. Then she locked the front door and got to work. Margaret had grown up on a farm before her parents died. She'd helped birth calves, stitched up injured animals, and once helped the town doctor remove a bullet from her father's leg after a hunting accident. Her hands knew what to do even as her mind raced with worry. She fetched water, clean cloths, whiskey for disinfecting, and a sewing needle. She cut away his shirt and examined the wound. The bullet had passed through his shoulder, in through the back, out through the front. Painful and bloody, but not immediately fatal if she could stop the infection. As she cleaned the wound, she noticed other things. His clothes, though dusty and blood-stained, were of fine quality. His hands showed calluses from hard work, but his nails were clean, well kept. The gun belt around his waist held expensive Colt revolver with a carved ivory handle. This was no ordinary cowhand. "Who are you?" she murmured as she worked. The man groaned as she poured whiskey over the wound, his eyes flickering open again. "Easy," Margaret soothed. "You've been shot. I'm cleaning the wound." "Who? Where?" His voice was rough with pain. "You're at Miller's General Store in Redemption Creek. I'm Margaret Hayes. You collapsed in the street." He tried to sit up but gasped at the pain. Margaret pushed him back down gently but firmly. Don't move. The bullet went through, but you've lost blood. I need to stitch you up. Can't. Stay here. Dangerous. He tried to rise again. You'll bleed to death if you move, Margaret said sharply. Now lie still and tell me who shot you and why, so I know whether to expect trouble. Something in her tone, the no-nonsense firmness, made him obey. He lay back, breathing hard. Hired guns. Tried to take me out on the North Road. I got away, but one of them winged me. Why would someone hire guns to kill you? His blue eyes met hers, calculating, deciding how much to trust this plain-faced woman who was threading a needle with steady hands. Name's Jake. Jake Morrison, he said finally. I own some land around here. Not everyone's happy about it. Margaret began stitching the exit wound on his shoulder. Her hands were steady despite her racing heart. Land disputes can get ugly. But hiring killers? That's beyond a simple boundary disagreement.
Jake gritted his teeth against the pain of the needle. I own more than just some land. I own the Double M Ranch. 15,000 acres. Largest spread in the territory. Margaret's hands paused for just a second. The Double M Ranch. Even she, a newcomer, had heard of it. The Millers had mentioned it yesterday, the biggest, richest ranch for 300 miles, owned by a reclusive bachelor who'd built an empire from nothing in just 10 years. You're the Jake Morrison, she asked quietly, continuing her stitching. Yeah. And if the men who shot me find out I'm here, they'll come finish the job. You should leave me. Save yourself. Margaret snorted, an indelicate sound she immediately regretted. I've spent the last 5 years being rejected and turned away by men who found me wanting. I'm not about to abandon a wounded man to murderers, regardless of who he is or how much land he owns. Despite his pain, the corner of Jake's mouth twitched. Rejected? I'm a mail-order bride. Or was. 5 times rejected. Yesterday was number 5. She tied off the first set of stitches and began on the entry wound on his back. Turns out I'm too plain, too thin, too old, and insufficiently vital for marriage. Fools, Jake muttered. Perhaps. But their rejection is your good fortune. A proper wife would have fainted at the sight of blood. I, however, grew up on a farm. I've stitched up worse than this on wounded animals. Jake actually laughed, a short, pained sound. Comparing me to wounded animals? If the comparison fits, Margaret replied, but her tone was gentle. Hold still. Almost done. She finished the stitching, bandaged him carefully, and helped him drink some water. Then she fashioned a makeshift bed from folded blankets behind the counter, where he'd be hidden from view if anyone came in. You need rest, she said firmly. And I need to figure out what to do with you. Send word to my ranch, Jake said. My foreman, Chuck Barnes, he'll come get me. Can you trust someone in town to carry a message? Margaret thought. The Millers. They're good people. But they'll be back soon, and I'll need to explain you. Tell them the truth, Jake said. Just, make sure no one else knows. Those men who shot me, they might have someone in town watching. As if on cue, the front door handle rattled. Someone trying to get in. Margaret's eyes met Jake's. She put a finger to her lips and went to the door. Through the window, she saw a man she didn't recognize, tall, hard-faced, with a scar running down his left cheek. He wasn't trying to open the door now, he was peering in, hand shading his eyes against the glass. Her blood ran cold. This was no ordinary customer. The man knocked. Store open. Closed for inventory. Margaret called out, proud her voice didn't shake. Back tomorrow. The man's eyes narrowed. He looked like he might argue. Then he nodded and walked away, but not before glancing up and down the street with the calculating gaze of a predator. Margaret waited until he disappeared from view, then locked the bolt and pulled the curtain. She turned to find Jake struggling to sit up, his gun in his hand despite the pain it clearly caused. "That him?" she whispered. "One of the men who shot you?" "No. But same type. Hired gun." He lowered the weapon with a grimace. "This is bigger than I thought. Margaret, you should leave. Go out the back. This isn't your fight." Margaret Hayes looked at the wounded man bleeding on her floor, then at the window where the killer had been, then back at Jake Morrison. For 5 years, she'd been unwanted. Useless. Rejected. But here, now, this man needed her. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Margaret felt like she mattered. "I'm not going anywhere," she said quietly. "Now rest. When the Millers return, we'll get word to your ranch. Until then, you're my responsibility." Jake stared at her, this plain, practical woman with steady hands and unexpected courage. Something stirred in his chest that had nothing to do with his wound. "You're something else, Margaret Hayes," he murmured before exhaustion claimed him. Margaret sat guard beside him, watching the window, and wondered what she'd gotten herself into. The Millers returned an hour later, and Margaret had to explain everything. To her relief, they believed her immediately. "Jake Morrison!" Joe exclaimed. "Lord have mercy. We need to get him to Doc Patterson." "No," Jake said, having woken at the commotion. "Doc's a good man, but everyone in town knows when he treats a gunshot wound. Too risky. Margaret's stitching will hold if we keep it clean." "But Mr. Morrison," Martha began. "Jake. And I'm serious. Someone in this town is working with the men who tried to kill me. Until I know who, I trust no one except you three." Over the next 2 hours, they formed a plan. Joe would ride to the Double M Ranch at dawn, when it would look natural for him to make a delivery. He'd inform Chuck Barnes, Jake's foreman, of what happened. Meanwhile, Jake would hide in the storeroom above the store, and they'd all pretend nothing unusual had occurred. That night, Margaret helped Jake up the narrow stairs to the small room where she'd been staying. Each step caused him to bite back groans of pain, but he made it. She settled him on the bed while she prepared to sleep on the floor. "Take the bed," Jake protested. "You've done enough. You're wounded and need proper rest." "I'll be fine." Her tone left no room for argument. As darkness fell, Margaret sat by the window, keeping watch. Jake lay in bed, studying her profile in the moonlight. "Why?" he asked suddenly. "Why what? Why help me? You don't know me. I could be a terrible person." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "When I found you bleeding in the street, I didn't see a rich rancher. I saw a human being in need. That's reason enough." "Those men who rejected you were idiots," Jake said softly. Margaret smiled sadly. "Perhaps. Or perhaps they simply saw clearly what I am, a plain, aging woman with no fortune, no beauty, and no prospects. There's no shame in truth. That's not truth. That's their limited vision." Jake shifted, wincing. "You want to know what I see?" "I'm not sure I do. I see a woman with steady hands who didn't faint at blood. Who had the courage to drag a wounded stranger to safety when she could have walked away. Who stood between me and a killer without flinching. Who speaks plainly and honestly without simpering or false modesty. That's worth more than a pretty face." Margaret felt heat rise to her cheeks. "You're delirious from blood loss. I'm clear-headed enough to recognize quality when I see it." Before Margaret could respond, she heard voices outside. She moved to the window and peered down. 3 men stood in the street below, talking in low voices. Even in the darkness, she could make out the scar-faced man from earlier. "Jake," she whispered urgently. "Those men are back." He was beside her in an instant, moving despite the pain. Together they watched as the men gestured toward the store, clearly discussing something. "They're looking for you," Margaret breathed. "Or making sure I'm not here." Jake's jaw tightened. This confirms it, someone told them I'd be coming through Redemption Creek today. This was a planned ambush. Who would want you dead badly enough to hire killers? Jake was quiet for a long moment. 4 months ago, I refused to sell my land to the Montana Cattle Syndicate. They want to monopolize all the range land in the territory. I'm the only major rancher who won't sell. They've been pressuring me, threats, sabotage, rustling my cattle. I didn't think they'd go this far. That's not just business rivalry, Margaret said. That's attempted murder. Which is why I need proof before I can go to the territorial marshal. My word against theirs won't be enough, they have politicians and lawyers bought and paid for. The men below split up, each heading in different directions. The scar-faced one walked directly toward the store. Margaret's heart hammered. He's coming here. Get away from the window, Jake said, pulling her back. If he sees movement. A knock on the store's front door echoed up the stairs. They froze. Another knock, louder. Then the sound of the doorknob rattling. Miller, a rough voice called. Got business to discuss. Downstairs, Margaret heard Joe's voice, sleepy and irritated. Store's closed. Come back in the morning. Need supplies for a cattle drive. Boss sent me to arrange credit. There was a pause. Then Joe's footsteps, and the sound of the door being unlocked. Make it quick, Joe grumbled. Decent folks are sleeping. Margaret and Jake exchanged glances. They could hear the conversation below, but not make out all the words. It sounded like a legitimate business transaction. But then, heard there was some excitement in town today. Rider getting thrown from a horse or some such. Jake's hand found Margaret's in the darkness, squeezing gently. A warning to stay quiet. News to me, Joe said. Been a quiet day. Now, you want these supplies or not? The transaction concluded, and the man left. They heard Joe lock the door and climb the stairs. He appeared in the doorway, his face grave. That was Samuel Pierce. Works for the syndicate. He was fishing for information. Did he believe you? Jake asked. Hard to say. But he'll be back. They know you were headed to town. When your horse showed up without you, they'll put 2 and 2 together. Joe rubbed his face tiredly. I'm riding to your ranch tonight, Jake. We can't wait until morning. It's too dangerous in the dark, Jake protested. More dangerous to wait. Chuck needs to know what's happening. Martha will stay here with you and Miss Hayes. I'll take the back trails, nobody will see me leave. After Joe left, Martha brought up soup and bread. Jake ate reluctantly, clearly frustrated at being bedridden while his life was in danger. Tell me about yourself, he said to Margaret as she changed his bandages later that night. Your real story, not the mail-order bride summary. So Margaret told him. About growing up on a farm in Ohio, losing her parents to cholera when she was 20, working as a seamstress to survive, how her eyes started failing for close work, how she'd answered the first mail-order bride advertisement out of desperation and hope. Each rejection hurt, she admitted. But the worst part was feeling invisible. Like I didn't matter enough for anyone to really see me. I see you, Jake said quietly. And I'm grateful it was you who found me today. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an understanding, a connection that surprised them both. The moment was interrupted by Martha calling up the stairs. Margaret! Come quick! They rushed down to find Martha at the window, her face pale. Fire, she whispered, pointing. In the distance, on the north road, flames lit up the night sky. That's old man Henderson's barn, Martha said. Why would it be? Distraction, Jake said grimly. They're drawing everyone out of town. When folks rush to help fight the fire, they'll search the buildings. Looking for you, Margaret finished. Jake turned to her, his face serious. Margaret, there's a root cellar beneath the store. Hidden entrance behind the flour barrels. Can you hide me there? We'll both hide there, Margaret said firmly. No. You need to be visible, acting normal. If they find me hidden and you with me, they'll know you helped. This way, you can claim ignorance. I'm not leaving you alone and wounded in a cellar. Margaret. We don't have time to argue. Already they could hear shouts in the street, people rushing toward the fire. Jake was right, in minutes, the town would be nearly empty. Martha made the decision for them. Both of you, in the cellar. Now. I'll stay upstairs, say you went to help at the fire, Margaret. If anyone searches, they'll find an old woman alone. They won't bother me. There was no time to argue. Margaret helped Jake down to the cellar, a small, cramped space that smelled of earth and potatoes. She pulled the entrance closed above them, plunging them into darkness. Joe returned just after dawn with 6 riders from the Double M Ranch, including Chuck Barnes, a weather-beaten man in his 50s with sharp eyes and a confident manner. "Boss!" Chuck exclaimed when he saw Jake. "We've been worried sick. When your horse came back without you." "I'm fine, thanks to Miss Hayes here." Jake gestured to Margaret, who was preparing breakfast. "She pulled me out of the street and patched me up." Chuck's eyes widened as he took in Margaret, her plain face, worn dress, and capable hands. "Ma'am, the Double M Ranch owes you a debt we can't repay." "I need no repayment," Margaret said quietly. "I only did what anyone should do." "What anyone should do and what anyone would do are different things," Chuck replied. "Especially with the syndicate's guns prowling the streets." Over breakfast, they discussed strategy. Jake was determined to gather evidence against the syndicate. Chuck reported that the fire at Henderson's barn was definitely arson, meant to provide cover for the search of the town. "They're getting desperate," Jake said. "Which makes them more dangerous." "You can't go back to the ranch yet," Chuck argued. "They'll be watching the roads. Then I'll stay here a few more days, until I'm strong enough to ride and we have a plan." What no one mentioned, but everyone noticed, was how Jake's eyes kept finding Margaret as they talked. And how she unconsciously moved closer to him, as if drawn by an invisible thread. Over the next 3 days, Margaret tended Jake's wound while he regained his strength. They talked for hours, about his childhood as an orphan who'd worked his way up from stable boy to ranch owner, about her dreams of having a home and family, about their fears and hopes. "Why never marry?" Margaret asked on the second evening as they sat in the room above the store. "Surely as a wealthy rancher, you've had opportunities." Jake was quiet for a moment. "I've had plenty of women interested in Jake Morrison, the rich rancher. But none who seemed to see Jake Morrison the man. They wanted the ranch, the money, the status. Not me." "That's remarkably similar to my complaint about the men who rejected me," Margaret observed. "They saw only the surface, the plain face, the age, the lack of dowry. Not who I am inside. Then we're both guilty of being invisible to the people who should have seen us most clearly." Their eyes met, and something shifted between them, a recognition, a possibility. On the 3rd day, Chuck arrived with news. One of the syndicate men got drunk and talked. "We have a witness willing to testify they were paid to kill you. It's enough for the territorial marshal." "Then it's time to end this," Jake said. By evening, the marshal had arrived from the territorial capital, arrested 3 syndicate operatives, and promised a full investigation. The immediate danger had passed. Jake stood in the miller's store, preparing to leave. His men waited outside with horses. He was healed enough to ride, though Margaret had warned him to take it easy. He'd thanked the millers profusely and promised them a generous reward, which Joe had tried to refuse until Jake insisted. Now he stood before Margaret, suddenly awkward. "I don't know how to thank you properly," he began. "You already have. Several times. Words aren't enough." He paused, seeming to gather courage. "Margaret, I know we've only known each other a few days. I know you've been rejected by men making hasty judgments. I don't want to be another man making assumptions about what you want or need. Then don't assume, Margaret said softly. Ask. Jake smiled. All right. Margaret Hayes, would you consider, that is, would you be willing to, damn, I'm making a mess of this. Take your time. He took a deep breath. I own a ranch that needs a woman's touch. I have a house that's empty except for me. I have a life that feels hollow because I've spent 10 years building an empire with no one to share it with. These past few days with you, talking, laughing, seeing your courage and kindness, made me realize what I've been missing. He took her hands. I'm not offering you a position as a mail-order bride. I'm not offering a business arrangement. I'm asking if you'd give me the chance to court you properly. To let me show you the ranch, introduce you to the life there, and see if what I think might be growing between us is real. Margaret's heart pounded. And if it's not? If we discover we're not suited? Then I'll pay your passage wherever you want to go, with enough money to start fresh. No obligations, no recriminations. But Margaret. His blue eyes held hers intensely. I think we might be exactly suited. I think maybe we found each other for a reason. Margaret thought of 5 rejections. 5 men who'd looked at her and found her wanting. 5 times she'd been sent away. But Jake Morrison had seen her at her most ordinary, covered in his blood, frightened but determined, plain-faced and practical. And he'd looked at her like she was extraordinary. I have a condition, she said. Name it. No assumptions about the future. We take our time getting to know each other. If it works, wonderful. If not, we part as friends. Agreed? Agreed. Jake grinned. Though I should warn you, I'm planning to work very hard to make it work. As am I, Margaret admitted, allowing herself to smile. The Millers insisted on throwing a small farewell dinner that evening. Word had spread about how Margaret had saved Jake Morrison's life, and several townspeople stopped by to express their admiration. William Thornton, the man who'd rejected Margaret just days earlier, appeared briefly. He stammered an apology, which Margaret accepted graciously. Watching him slink away, Jake shook his head. His loss, he murmured. His loss, my gain, Margaret corrected, and was rewarded with Jake's warm laugh. The next morning, Margaret said goodbye to the Millers with genuine affection. They'd given her shelter when she needed it, and she'd always be grateful. You come visit us, Martha insisted, hugging her. And if that Jake Morrison doesn't treat you right, you come straight back here. I will, Margaret promised. Jake helped her into the wagon himself, solicitous of her comfort in a way that made her feel cherished. As they rode out of Redemption Creek toward the Double M Ranch, Margaret felt something she hadn't felt in years, hope. The ranch, when they arrived after a day's travel, took her breath away. Rolling hills, vast herds of cattle, a beautiful ranch house built from honey-colored wood with a wide porch and mountain views. It's magnificent, she breathed. Wait until you see inside, Jake said, looking almost nervous. It's not fancy, I've focused more on the land than decoration. But if you stay, you can change anything you like. Inside, the house was indeed sparse but well built. Large rooms with good bones, waiting for a woman's touch. Margaret could already imagine curtains at the windows, rugs on the floors, the smell of baking bread filling the kitchen. The previous owner died with no heirs, Jake explained. I bought the place 6 years ago and have been building the herd ever since. But it's a lonely house for one person. Over the following weeks, Margaret settled into ranch life. Jake gave her a guest room and made no assumptions, true to his word. But every day, they spent hours together, riding the property, planning improvements to the house, talking over dinner. She met the ranch hands, who treated her with respect after Chuck made it clear she was to be honored as the woman who saved the boss's life. She started helping the ranch cook, improving meals and bringing order to the kitchen. She began sewing curtains and cushions, slowly making the house a home. And every day, she fell a little more in love with Jake Morrison. It wasn't his wealth, though the security was admittedly comforting after years of poverty. It wasn't his ranch, though she loved the land. It was him, his dry humor, his fairness with his men, his surprising gentleness, the way he listened when she talked, really listened. And she could see he felt the same. The way his face lit up when she entered a room. How he sought her opinion on ranch matters. The almost reverent way he touched her hand when helping her dismount from a horse. 6 weeks after her arrival, on a beautiful autumn evening, Jake found her on the porch watching the sunset. "I've been patient," he said without preamble. "We agreed to take our time, and I've honored that. But Margaret, I need to know, do you feel what I feel?" "That depends on what you feel," she said, though her racing heart knew the answer. "I feel like I've been searching for you my whole life without knowing it. I feel like every rejection you endured, every hardship I faced, was leading us both to that moment in the street when you found me. I feel like you're not just the woman who saved my life, you're the woman who makes my life worth living." He took her hand. "I love you, Margaret Hayes. Completely, irrevocably, permanently." Margaret felt tears slide down her cheeks, happy tears, for the first time in years. "I love you too," she whispered. "So much it frightens me sometimes." Jake pulled her into his arms, and their first kiss was gentle, reverent, perfect. "Marry me," he said against her lips. "Not as a mail-order bride. Not as a business arrangement. But as the woman I love and want to spend my life with." "Yes," Margaret laughed through her tears. "Yes, absolutely yes." They were married a month later in a simple ceremony at the ranch, with the Millers as honored guests and the entire ranch hands serving as witnesses. Margaret wore a dress she'd sewn herself, not elaborate, but beautiful in its simplicity, much like she was. As Jake slipped the ring on her finger, he whispered, "You are seen, Margaret Morrison. Every day for the rest of our lives, I will see you." And he did. For the next 50 years, through hardships and joys, through building the ranch into the largest in the territory, through raising 3 children and hosting countless neighbors, Jake Morrison saw his wife clearly, her strength, her kindness, her quiet courage. And Margaret, who had once believed herself unwanted and invisible, lived a life filled with love, purpose, and the deep satisfaction of being truly known. The town of Redemption Creek never forgot the story of the mail-order bride who'd been rejected by a fool, only to save the life of and marry the most eligible bachelor in Montana territory. It became a local legend, a reminder that sometimes rejection is simply redirection, leading you exactly where you need to be. And whenever young women came to Margaret, heartbroken over romantic disappointments, she would smile and tell them her story. "The right person," she'd say, "doesn't just see your surface. They see your soul. And when you find someone who truly sees you, all those rejections become blessings in disguise." She would know. She'd lived it.